Welcome to our episode of Biblical Archaeology, From the Ground Down. Presented by Bible Interact and hosted by Dr. George Sparks. Join us as we explore the fascinating world of the Bible from leading experts in the field of archaeology.
Hello everyone, I'm Dr. David Graves, an experienced biblical archaeologist and CEO of Electronic Christian Media. I'm here today with another exciting episode on our Archaeology Discoveries channel, where we discuss important archaeological artifacts related to the Bible. Thanks for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe to our channel.
Well, welcome, folks. My name is Dr. George Sparks, and this is Biblical Archaeology from the Ground Down, sponsored by Bible Interact. I got my favorite guest on today, Dr. David Graves, and he's going to talk about something you all know about, the Behistun Inscription. But honestly, it's pretty important. And we're going to find out more about it and why it's so important, especially in the translation of, I'm just going to say cuneiform, but I ain't going to give away the ghost. Let me tell you about Dr. Graves. Dr. Graves received his PhD from the University of Aberdeen, Scotland, a native of Canada, has been involved in teaching the Bible and archaeology for more than 35 years, as retired assistant professor of Liberty University, Rawlings School of Divinity from Lynchburg, Virginia. He has taught archaeology at Oxford University, England, provided tours of the Ashmolean and the British Museum, traveled extensively in the Middle East, been involved in Mount Ararat research, consultant to the National Geographic Productions. He has also involved in archaeology excavations at Qumran, the Temple Mount, Shiloh in Israel, as well as Tel El Hammam excavation project in Jordan. In January 2017, he was part of a team who excavated the Dead Sea Scrolls Cave 53 near Qumran and discovered evidence that the cave once contained Dead Sea Scrolls, now identified as Q12. For many years, Dr. Graves has been a field supervisor at Tel El Hammam, contended, or possibly it is, Sodom in the Middle Bronze Age. Also, he discovered the mystery city of Livius in the Roman Byzantine period. And we did a podcast on that, and be sure to tune in for that one. Also, he is also a member of the Near Eastern Archaeological Society, NEAS. He has authored a number of books published through his company, Electronic Christian Media, ECM. In addition, he has also authored a number of journal articles on the Bible and archaeology, most available through academia.ed, and that's EDU. Welcome to the program, Dr. David Graves.
Good to be with you, George, as always.
Wow.
It'd be a fun podcast.
Well, let's see where you're taking us today. Both of us got our little Behistun inscriptions behind us. I always want to try to compete and, in my mind, think like, I wonder what Dr. Graves was going to use. And I'm going to see if I can get one that's, I like yours because, you can see, like you said, you can see how high the inscription actually is from the ground.
Mm.
And I had mine, in a way, looking up to see how high it is. But even at this, somebody was using a telephoto lens. So it really doesn't give the exact distance from ground to the actual inscription. But I don't want to give it away. I don't want to be that spoiler alert.
Good. Well, I'll start my presentation and we'll get into it a little bit. I've got some photos to show. So I've titled it The Mystery of the Behistun Inscription. Last week we talked about the Rosetta Stone and the importance of the Rosetta Stone for translating Egyptian hieroglyphics and unlocking 3,000 years of Egyptian history. The Behistun inscription is similar, but rather than unlocking Egyptian hieroglyphics, it has unlocked the cuneiform language. You see it there on my plate. This is King Darius the First, close-up of it as it is presented on the Behistun inscription. And then there's some of the hieroglyphics behind it. The little triangles. This is the writing of a number of different languages, Akkadian, Babylonian, and Elamite. A lot of cuneiform is used. The material, of course, is from my book on the archaeology of the Old Testament, with the footnotes here, sample page. So there's lots of footnotes. Anybody wants to do more research. Well, the area we're talking about is in modern Iran. It's not accessible by a lot of tourists. Some do go there, and the city is called Persepolis. It's been extensively excavated, although recently there's been quite a bit of damage by ISIS and others. The Achaemenid Persian Empire. So where the Persians have come from. George and I were talking earlier about how the rise and fall of many different nations, like Egypt, and the Babylonians, and the Persians. We have a rise and fall of many different empires. The Roman Empire also fell. So I guess it just teaches us not to be too cocky in our own present day. So Persian Empire, we're talking about Behistun. This is a site here in Iran. Persepolis is down here. I just showed a photograph of that famous empire and city. But it comes from a place up here by Susa, just north of Susa. Henry Rawlinson is the gentleman who used the inscription that he had gathered by Niebuhr and Lebrun and Henry Rich, to decipher the then unknown Akkadian language. So this Elamite and Akkadian were unknown up until this time period. Didn't know how to read it. So it was an unknown Akkadian language. And this particular inscription is the one that they use, like the Rosetta Stone, to decipher the meaning that was written on the text. Some of them are a papyrus copy of the Behistun inscription now is in the News Museum in Berlin. It was also found written in Aramaic at a Jewish military outpost located at Elephantine Island in Egypt. So we go over here to Egypt. There's a copy of it. So it was an inscription that was carried around and used in different nations. And of course, the Babylonians are trading with the Egyptians. They're traveling up through the trade routes and doing trading. And that's where we find this information there. So it's found in Aramaic, which is like a cousin of ancient Hebrew. The significance of the find is that it allows scholars access to a wide range of Babylonian tablets like the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Enuma Elish. These are creation and flood epics, and that sheds light, of course, in the biblical text, now that they have deciphered the Akkadian language. So what the Rosetta Stone did for Egyptian hieroglyphics, the Behistun inscription does for the Akkadian language, opening up that wide spectrum of documents like the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Enuma Elish and the Atrahasis epic. Here's a bit of a timeline, places at the time of Haggai and Zechariah. 539 BC, Babylon falls. Cyrus defeats Belshazzar. Appeal to Darius in 520 BC, with Darius I, and then Xerxes, and then Artaxerxes, with Nehemiah in Jerusalem in 445 BC. So Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther, all of these characters. So that's kind of places us in the time frame of King Darius I, so before Esther and Nehemiah. And so some of this material in scripture is recorded in Esther, Haggai, Zechariah, and Ezra. Here's some of the scaffolding as they have done some work repairing it. no doubt originally when they chiseled this out of the rock face, they would have had to have used scaffolding similar to this. No, probably not the iron, but a wooden scaffolding of some kind to get there to chisel that. The languages on it is trilingual. As I mentioned, the Rosetta Stone, while there are 3 different scripts on it, it's really bilingual. So you have the Egyptian hieroglyphics, and then you have underneath of that, you have the Demotic, which is like a shorthand for Egyptian hieroglyphics. And then you had Greek in the very, very bottom. So they use the Greek to translate the 2 languages, and they do the same thing here. We have the Babylonian Akkadian. This is where the arrow shows that square there is the Akkadian. Then there's some Elamite here and Elamite up here. But then down here with the Old Persian, of course, that is understood. So they knew the Old Persian and used that to figure out the other 2 languages. So you go from what we call the known to the unknown. The principle we use in archaeology. You find 3 stones in a row, you have a wall, and then you go from the known to what you don't know, buried in the earth beside it. Same thing, same principle we use for translating. Here is an interesting kind of a chart showing sort of the evolution. Down this side, you have the Anglo-Roman A to Z, and then you have the equivalents in all these different languages. It's a little bit hard to see, but if you blow it up, I think on your computer, you might be able to make them out. So you have Greek, Phoenician, Hebrew, you have Demotic, hieroglyphs. So it kind of shows the evolution, what the A looked like in all of the different languages. And you can see here Ugaritic, Old Persian, and the Sumerian. The folks that were involved with the translation of this, Grotfend, George Grotfend, he was the individual who sorted out the Old Persian cuneiform. So he figured that out. And then Niebuhr, Karsten Niebuhr as well. So Henry Rawlinson used the work of the previous generation to help him sort out the Babylonian cuneiform. Here's Henry Rawlinson as a young man, and here he is as an older gentleman. I colorized both these old black and white images. I just kind of like the color, gives a better idea of what they look like. And he was a great epigrapher. He was a specialist in language, and he taught himself how to read this script and did a lot of study and research on it. He was a diplomat, so on his weekends he would go out and look at all these different sites. And this particular one, the story goes that he had to get a squeeze. Now a squeeze is we take like paper mache, and we squeeze it into the dents and the markings on the stone, and then you have a negative that shows up of the positive on the rock, and then you can make casts of it, plaster Paris, things like that. And that's what he did with this particular inscription. But to get it, the story goes that he had to bring in scaffolding and wood, and then he had a Bedouin boy dangle from a rope on this cliff to get the squeeze that he needed. So it was quite a perilous adventure to try and get what he needed from this mountainside. This individual, Reverend Edward Hincks, was an Orientalist as well, an expert in these languages, the rector of Kilili. And he worked for the British Museum, who kept his papers, and taught himself how to decipher the Babylonian cuneiform. So he's kind of an interesting individual, a minister, but a brilliant Orientalist. And here's the plaque that has been erected in his honor in England. Well, some people say, you guys can't really read that stuff. Those are just crazy markings on stone. It's not really a language. And there were skeptics back in the 1800s. And so there was a competition set up in 1857, the Royal Asiatic Society. And Talbot, Henry Talbot, suggested that an undeciphered cuneiform text be given to the experts that claim they can read this stuff to translate it. So let's have a blind test and competition and see what they do with the text that we give them. And this particular event, they sent the 3 different texts to Julius Opert, who claimed he could read it, to Reverend Hinks, who said he could read it, and to Henry Rawlinson, and who said he could read it. And so 3 identical texts were sent to these 3 different scholars, independent of each other, and they had to translate it, bring the results back to the Royal Asiatic Society. Well, it sounds like an interesting competition. Well, they were up for it, and sure enough, they bring back their translations, and they were all virtually identical and close to one another in their translation. Hinks was probably the superior reading, the Reverend Hinks, which is interesting, even though Rawlinson was such a good Orientalist and epigrapher. And Rawlinson was almost identical to Hinks in his translation. Opert wasn't far off from that. So they knew that the language had been cracked and that they could read it because of this blind competition that was brought back to the Royal Asiatic Society in 1857. So I thought that was a really interesting competition that showed that they had indeed cracked the code, and we can actually read this stuff. I believe that you've done a podcast already, George, with a gentleman from the British Museum who reads it, Israel Finkel.
Yep, you're absolutely correct.
And I would recommend that interview, an interesting character. He looks a little bit like me, or actually I look a little bit like him, big white beard. But I can't read this stuff, but he can and reads it on a daily basis pretty much. So this particular Behistun inscription that features Darius the First or Darius the Great, 522 to 486 BC, is part of an historic site on the famous Silk Road in Iran. So if anybody goes on that route, they can see it. And as I mentioned, what Rosetta Stone did for deciphering Egyptian hieroglyphics, the Behistun inscription did for deciphering Akkadian cuneiform and opening up that entire library of material. And as I said, there's a papyrus copy found in Elephantine in Egypt. Also spelled the name Darius, as did the Bible. So we know of this individual from the Bible, as well as from these this papyrus from Egypt, as well as from the Behistun inscription. One of the mythical features from Susa, these are actually bricks that they glazed bricks, beautiful. I love it. So that's my basic presentation on the Behistun inscription. And
I was going to use this for our lecture, on the, it looks like a big piece of stone. Actually, the Rosetta Stone is like 2 or 3 car engines. So it's pretty good size. And then you can't even see it. These are so small. And this is a large version. and it was made back in 1966. So I wanted to get one of the older ones that had the depth to it that looks like stone. And but it still isn't big enough to see anything. But you got the hieroglyph, the Demotic, and then the Greek. And you're saying they start off with the Greek, and they make the comparisons of what they could find first, and then I'm making it simple, process of elimination. Then they start slowly finding out more and more. I think the first thing they found out was the Ptolemaic names because they were in circles called cartouches.
Yes.
So once they were identifying the names that helped to identify and give pronunciation, the Greek equivalent to the hieroglyph. So now they could use what they known from those inscriptions, the hieroglyphs within the inscriptions, to help decipher. I ain't gonna try to say it.
Decipher.
And anyway, thank you. I don't know. You get stuck on some. How did you say that? Wait a minute. It's a feeling like, sometimes an inscription is like a box of chocolates.
That's true. Well, it's good to point out that that the Rosetta Stone is about 6 feet high, so it's a big part of a stele that's all that's left. Would have been rounded at the top, but yeah, the emperors always wanted to write down their exploits and what they did, and this one's no different. In Iran, the Persians wanted to etch in stone their exploits and what they did. So what's written on it is not as important as the benefit of being able to use the message to translate the inscriptions. If they had never have put it down in 3 different translations, we probably would have been a long time trying to figure out how to read those ancient languages. So they are really beneficial when they put them up bilingually or trilingually, giving us the known.
You're right, and of course it's extremely rare. The Rosetta Stone and Behistun are one of a kinds. And when we think of what the Egyptians did with the Rosetta Stone, that yes, it's as big as a car engine, but that's the fragment that we have. The actual one, if it was in one piece, was even larger, right? Because we just got the fragment. Yeah. However, thinking that the Rosetta Stone in its entirety would be nothing compared to Behistun. This is on the side of a mountain. And look at the town beneath you and think that here they are, late 6th century, early 5th century? Is that a good one or no?
Yep.
Okay. And then I'm not smart. I was just watching the slides in this video, folks.
6th century.
And then, yeah. So, but to think they did that all the way back then, and to get up there, and somebody had the knowledge of these languages to do it. Maybe they were like ambassadors and correspondents and scribes, but to actually get up there and carve in stone, and how long that would take, and the complications of, that they'd have to actually reduce the side of the mountain so it's flat, so they'd have a surface to carve on.
Yeah.
And after they do that, they got to actually think of, well, look where those people are right there, that procession of people. They'd have to say, well, we're going to not make that as flat as the rest of it because we're making images here. It's all complicated. And I wonder, because when the Egyptians did stuff like the Rosetta Stone, they'd have a scribe go first, right? And then draw it. And then somebody else comes along and carves it. I wonder if they did that there as well. Somebody goes along and does all this, because then they have people, not scribes, carving. Scribes can't carve. They're probably, they're not. I imagine the rock cutters are the bodybuilders, and the scribes are the pretty lean, or maybe pretty heavy, because back then, heaviness was in.
Here is a little bit of trivia for the audience. I've been working on an encyclopedia of biblical archaeology, and I'm in the L's. And in the Roman period, the person who did the carving of stone was called a lapidary. Now, lapidary is actually a font that we have for Microsoft Word. You have the lapidary font, but that was the actual name for the carver of stone in the Roman period, a lapidary. And we've named it a font after it because of the carving. So they would have, yes, a scribe come in, and the lapidary would carve out the letters. The person who did the carving of the stone may not even been literate, but he was an expert in carving.
Right.
So the other thing to realize is this is so far up the mountain that you'd need binoculars to be able to read it. So it's not like Mount Rushmore, where we put the president's features up there. These ones were King Darius. He put his face up there, but the writing behind was so small that it was just more of a memorial. And thankfully, we were able to read it.
So they went up there knowing that if you're from the ground level, you can't possibly read it.
That's right.
And I wonder how many people were literate back then to even read it.
True.
So like you're saying, instead of having like a grave marker, which eventually get removed in time, destroyed in time, vandalized, if it's on the side of a mountain like that, I see what you're saying by a memorial. That is awesome. It really is.
Yeah. And then I have the close-up on my cover slide. It also has it looks like an eagle, but it's a Syrian emblem that is used in Persia. I forget the technical term for it. I have to look it up. But
what's involved in that symbol? Do you know?
Well, it's a deification of one of the emperors, I believe. It looks like an eagle's wing. You can see the two wings and feather. I should have looked up all the details on that, but I didn't before. But it's a very common image that we find. And there's a similar type of image we find in Egypt as well. So there's a lot of syncretism between Babylon and Egypt because they're trading with each other. And hey, last weekend I was down to, Egypt, and I like that stuff that was at the hotel. So I'm going to put it in my house when I get back to Babylon. That's the kind of thing that happened,
I understand what you're saying. I mean, nations borrow from each other, but I don't know if I can agree with you on this one. And I know it's rare that we disagree, because I was watching this program in all seriousness, Ancient Aliens, and there's a possibility. I can't take it. I'm going to laugh.
I love you, George. Yeah.
Did you think I was serious? I mean, I was trying to keep a straight face. I can't do it.
Well,
that they could fly back then. They really knew how to fly, and they didn't even need scaffolding. They just get up there and chisel away. But that technology, of course, has been lost to us, and all we got now is those symbols like that. And between giants and flying people, we just had a rough time since the ancients that could do these things, and now we're stuck. We're grounded, man. And we got to have jets and everything. It's sad. We lost a lot.
You got to be careful though, George, because people can do clips of these videos and put it out there as, look at all this nonsense that they're doing on his podcast. It's a bit like, we don't want to get into politics, but it's a bit like what Trump says they're doing, clipping his stuff. And anyway, we don't want to be talking about aliens or politics.
Right. But anyway, I had to throw that out there. What the heck? We could still edit it.
Yeah,
but
great.
And the Behistun Inscription is so unusual, and it's very rarely talked about at all. But the Rosetta Stone comes up, and I think everybody knows about the Rosetta Stone.
Yeah, well, it
And
becomes, the center feature of the British Museum, whereas the Behistun inscription in Iran is sort of off beaten path, on the Silk Road, and not many people know about it, but it is as important for its significance as the Rosetta Stone. As I said, we unlocked Egyptian hieroglyphics with the Rosetta, that stone, and now with Behistun we unlocked the Akkadian documents like the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Enuma Elish and the Atrahasis Epic, and all those tablets that they have, 130,000 of them at the British Museum in cuneiform. So, and there's actually now I forget how many volumes, 30, 40 volumes of the dictionary of the Akkadian dictionary with all the words and so on.
right.
They've been working on that for years out of the University of Chicago. So very, very important. It opens up an entire library to us of material, documents, and cultural backgrounds. The Rosetta Stone is not the only game in town.
Exactly. Once again, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Everybody, you have a great day. This is Biblical Archaeology from the Ground Down. Remember to like, subscribe, ring the bell, and have a good day. Thank you very much.